The late 90s and early 2000s was such a great time to be a gamer, and it seemed that every single game that was coming out was memorable in some form, especially around 2000 and 2001. Just in 2000 alone, we got Grand Theft Auto 3, Halo Combat Evolved, Silent Hill 2, among many others. It was also the year that Max Payne was unleashed on the world. Max Payne, pain in the neck, pain to the max, call him what you will. He showed up on the gaming scene and things would never be the same. Why is that? I hear you murmuring under bated breath. Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let's just find out, shall we? Developed by the relatively unknown Remedy Entertainment, Max Payne was a gritty, realistic film noir-inspired third-person shooter, where you step into the shoes of Max as he waged a one-man war against the Italian mafia, avenging the death of his wife and child.
No, please God, no.
The whole alcoholic, pill-popping, man-on-the-edge, nothing-to-lose archetype was carried across to the other two games in the series. The second game, The Fall of Max Payne, also developed by Remedy Entertainment, and finally Max Payne 3, developed by Rockstar Games. Though this wasn't entirely new in terms of character traits, the first game's real key point of difference among other third-person shooters was the bullet time skill, where you could slow time down but still move your mouse in real time, allowing for much more accurate shots. This became an essential skill needed to finishing the game, as the shooting and gunplay was fairly difficult, only allowing the player a very small margin of error, and with Max only able to survive a handful of bullets before dying. Nowadays, we're quite used to seeing games that throw in this sort of slow motion mechanic in one form or another, but Max Payne was really the first one to pull it off so well. Max can either leap left or right in slow motion whilst firing his weapons, what the game calls a shoot dodge, and this is probably going to be the skill you use the most. Most of the inspiration for these mechanics comes from those old John Woo films like Hard Boiled, The Killers, Better Tomorrow, most notably the whole dual pistols thing and the gun fu, and the release of the Matrix film around the same time also helped its popularity. Now, the game itself begins with a short prologue cinematic showing Max atop the Agir Corporation building holding an automatic shotgun as he's being arrested by the police, whilst a smoking, destroyed helicopter plummets to the ground beneath him. The game then flashes back several days to explain how this all came to pass. In the days leading up to this pivotal moment, Max loses his best friend Alex. He also single-handedly wipes out several prominent mafia figures and gets involved in an all-out war with the Agir Corporation. A flashback during the prologue has Max coming home from work to find his home invaded by junkies that killed both his wife and infant daughter, and this is the threshold moment that pushes Max over the edge. Just imagine if Frank Castle had been a cop instead of a Marine, and you get the picture. Along the way, Max befriends a Russian mafia member named Vlad, drinks bourbon with Mona Sachs, who's the so-called evil twin of a mafioso's wife, and this is important to note because both of these characters would play a big role in the sequel.
How do you like your whiskey?
The story is largely told through short cinematics in a visual novel style, where dialogue is shown through speech bubbles and the screen is organised to appear like the panels from a comic book. It's pretty obvious that the models standing in for these cinematics are the same people who worked on the game. I guess that Remedy couldn't afford to pay real actors, which isn't really a bad thing, and you can totally see how much fun these guys would have had making these.
You're dead, Payne! What the hell are you waiting for, you apes? Kill him! Kill him!
Max talks in this very gravelly, almost cheesy voice, speaking in cliches and using lots of one-liners and metaphors to convey even simple dialogue. His very likeness is based off the head writer Sam Lake, with a facial expression that was often referred to as what someone looks like with a carrot up their ass. On that note, it is very much a self-aware game, from the tone of the storytelling through to lots of fourth wall breaking moments and the often over-the-top violence. Make no mistake, this is a violent game, but not in a gratuitous sense of the word. Most you'll see is blood on the ground or wall when you shoot someone, but the sheer body count is in the hundreds, and there's a few instances where innocent people get blown away. They're also often moving through seedy drug dens, dealing with junkies and hitmen, and there's a few nightmare sequences where you kind of delve into Max's thoughts, portraying this horrible burden he suffers from the memory of his murdered wife and kid. The events of the game cause him to unravel further, with these nightmares being a combination of his memories conjoined with recent events, creating this kind of cocktail of madness where you see firsthand how he's being unhinged. The drug Valkyr, which is at the center of everything, is this horrible substance that directly keeps Max propelled through his whole journey, and as a character, he wouldn't exist without it.
It's time to show you the benefits of my brew.
And you know, for a game that's frequently so tongue-in-cheek, it's amazing how it pulls off these darker moments so flawlessly. I think all things considered, Max Payne hasn't aged all that poorly when you're talking about the visuals. The character models is where the game truly shows its age, but the texture work and the environments are still pretty good looking. It was one of the first games I can remember playing that seemed to use photos for most of the textures, giving everything an almost photorealistic look. Environments are modeled with lots of attention to detail and really feel like the areas they're trying to represent. The first few areas of the game take place in a New York subway, then you're in a series of similar looking crack houses followed by an Italian restaurant, a mansion before some very corporate and industrial looking areas for the last few chapters of the game. The only other games I can think of that came out around the same time that portrayed environments as realistically as Max Payne did was Kingpin Life of Crime and Sin, two first-person shooters with some also palpable locations. But the fact that Max Payne was modelled after New York gives it more of an edge due to it being an actual real-world location. The only real downside is that it doesn't support widescreen resolutions, but otherwise I had no issues getting the game running, and I was still amazed by all the little things that you come across as well. Like how bullets react differently depending on what type of surface they hit, and the little details added to the animations for characters is also really impressive. Max's leather jacket swings back and forth as he runs, for instance, and he also walks with a limp when his health is low. Controlling Max is much like any other third-person shooter, at least on the PC. You use the mouse to aim and fire your weapons, and the keyboard to move forward, strafe left and right, jump, and so on. Max can dual-wield pistols and some machine guns, and you get your hand on a shotgun, among many others, and throw grenades and Molotov cocktails. On paper, it doesn't sound like anything out of the ordinary. But what you're most likely to notice with the shooting is that it's almost projectile-like in a sense. You're always up against enemies with guns, pistols, rifles, shotguns, and so forth, and in any other game, these weapons would be hit scanning. Hit scanning for the uninitiated is where if your crosshair is on something and you shoot, you're going to hit what's in the crosshair. With enemies, this means that if they're in your line of sight, they'll hit you as well. Now this is standard for weapons like shotguns and pistols, but what Max Payne does to level the playing field is include a sort of delay from when you fire a weapon and when it hits its intended target. Different weapons have different bullet velocities, and then the distance you are from what you're shooting at is dependent on this as well. Now these same limitations apply to the enemies, so someone shooting you from the other side of a room with a measly pistol is going to have a hell of a time hitting you and vice versa. Reaction time does still play a big part in this, but your mobility will also reduce the amount of damage you're going to take here. It's a brilliantly simple way to improve what in any other single shooting game would be an unfairly difficult shooting mechanic, and make it seem a little bit more balanced. Having said that though, this is still a supremely hard game. In fact, it's probably one of the hardest shooting games you're ever going to play. You will die a lot. This occurs early on in the game because you've only got a handful of weapons to use, and the shotguns in general are just really ineffective. But later in the game, most encounters with enemies will often kill you before you're even able to react, as enemies wield assault rifles and grenade launchers, and death is often instantaneous. There's no health kits in this game, instead you've got pain pills, which heal a small portion of your health over time, but quite often you'll have no pain pills at all, and always be 1 or 2 shots away from death. Max Payne uses a difficulty mode in which the game is constantly becoming more harder or easier depending on how well or poorly you are playing. The concept here is that if you're dying a lot, the AI for enemies will become a lot more forgiving. Now this is fine and dandy for people who've never played video games before, but for people who aren't completely terrible, this mechanic will really show its flaws. Now it's not the best idea only because if you're in any way decent at the game, the difficulty will eventually get to the point of pure lunacy. By that I mean it will become so insanely hard that preventing death is pretty much impossible. I'm talking instant deaths, enemies that have split-second reaction times and are accurate from ridiculous ranges. And you'll have to suffer for a bit until the game readjusts to the fact that it's kicking your ass and eases off a little bit. There's hard games, and then there's Max Payne, and this is the type of game that's going to beat you up time after time, but that's alright because you'll get better and better, and if you don't, the game will give you a break, for a short period of time anyway. It's a constant tug-of-war between the player and the game that just feels immensely satisfying when you finally overcome the odds and complete a tough gunfight. In a way, I think this kind of thing was intentional. I mean, if a real person was in that kind of situation, realistically, no matter how good you were with a gun, you're going to get killed at one point. Max Payne feels like a game where it's almost aware of this, unrelenting in how brutally tough it often is. Unloading on a room full of thugs with a couple of MAC-10s before limping to a pile of painkillers and slugging a few back to keep yourself on your feet after catching a storm of bullets is the type of thing that really encapsulates everything this game is about. It's hard for me to find things to complain about with this game because I have such fond memories of playing it when it first came out, and it's one of those games that I play through every 6 months or so. I'd even say it's in my top 10 games of all times list, so it can be hard for me to be objective and find negative things worth mentioning. If I could touch again on it really quickly, I guess the adaptive difficulty is the only thing I don't like, and the issue with it is also its biggest strength. I mean, a difficulty that changes and modifies itself to suit each player's personal style is a good thing on paper, but sometimes you just want to set a difficulty mode and forget about it. Playing through the game, learning the ropes, and ultimately kicking ass is the kind of satisfaction that is derived from playing a game and becoming good at it. But the issue with Max Payne and its difficulty mode is that even when you're really good at it, you can still be killed so quickly and easily because the damage enemies do has just been ramped up so high. There are a few outright cheap areas as well, which are brutally difficult and just blatantly unfair, but I think I could count these areas on one hand, so I'm not even going to bother bringing them up. Overall, I really do consider Max Payne to be a masterpiece, and part of what makes it so amazing is how seemingly unaware it is of its own brilliance. It's proof that you don't need open world environments, constant cinematics, quick time events, or any of that shit that permeates the modern gaming industry. It's practically linear from start to finish, and a testament to how if something is linear, that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just a solid, well thought out concept which ultimately carries the game to great heights. When it's all developed by a group of people who clearly love what they were doing, it ends up having this kind of magic that can't be put into words.
You can't just hurt me in cold blood.
Just keep telling yourself that.
People don't seem to talk about it as much as they do other industry defining titles like Half-Life and so forth, but it really did have a huge impact on the gaming industry, and the whole slow motion bullet time thing became much more common after its release. There was a terrible port of the game released for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, and an even worse adaptation for the Game Boy, but the real version to get is the one for Microsoft Windows. Killing junkies, gangsters, and mercenaries in slow motion has never been so satisfying.